some betrayals cut so deep they rewrite your understanding of love itself. Meredith stands at the altar in her grandmother's vintage lace, watching her world collapse in real time. Her fiancé Marcus exchanges vows with her maid of honor, Sarah, while 200 guests pretend this was always the plan. The words flow like poison honey. Love, honor, cherish. The same promises he whispered to her just months ago, now offered to another woman wearing Meredith's chosen flowers in her hair. No one meets her eyes as the congregation files out. They all knew. The secret glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. Everyone except the bride who planned her own wedding. Marcus approaches as she stands frozen in the empty church, still gripping her bouquet like a weapon. "I'm sorry," he says, not quite looking at her. "We fell in love. It just happened." As if love were lightning, random, and uncontrollable rather than a choice made every single day. Meredith doesn't scream, doesn't cry, doesn't demand explanations. She simply walks away, the train of her dress trailing behind her like a ghost. She drives blindly through mountain roads until her car breaks down outside an isolated cabin she inherited from her great-aunt. Snow begins falling as darkness approaches. She has nowhere else to go. Sometimes the end of one story is simply the beginning of something far more dangerous. 3 weeks pass like a fever dream. Meredith exists in the cabin like a ghost haunting her own life, surviving on canned soup and wounded pride. The wedding dress hangs in the bedroom closet, a specter in white lace that catches her eye every time she opens the door. She can't bring herself to look at it directly, but she can't throw it away either. Her grandmother's pearl, neutral territories. Away from everything familiar, everything that reminded her of her failure. Away from Kai and his new mate and the life she'd never have. "When would I leave?" she asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Within the week, if you're interested." Morrison leaned forward, genuine concern in his expression. "Sarah, rejection isn't a reflection of your worth. Sometimes the moon goddess has different plans than we understand. But if that were true, why did it hurt so much? Why did her wolf remain silent and withdrawn, grieving for a bond that had lasted mere seconds? "I'll consider it," she said, though her mind was already made up. Staying here would slowly kill what remained of her spirit. After Morrison left, Sarah stood at the window watching the sun set over the compound. Somewhere in those buildings, Kai was moving on with his life, unmarked by their brief connection. The unfairness of it burned in her throat. She began packing that night, folding her few belongings into a single bag. Most of her possessions held memories she wanted to leave behind. The dress she'd worn to the festival went into the fireplace, silk and dreams consumed by flames. As she worked, a strange sensation prickled along her spine. The feeling of being watched, of eyes tracking her movements. She moved to the window but saw only darkness between the trees. Her damaged wolf stirred slightly, responding to something her human senses couldn't identify. Probably just a curious pack member wondering when the rejected girl would finally leave. But as she turned away from the window, she missed the massive shadow that detached itself from the tree-line. Golden eyes tracked her movements with patient intensity, memorizing every detail of her face, her scent, her obvious pain. The watcher had been coming every night since the rejection, drawn by forces he didn't fully understand. There was something about this particular female, something that called to the predator in him with irresistible pull. Her pain sang in his blood, her isolation making her perfect prey. Soon she would be alone in the neutral territories, away from pack protection and family support. Soon she would be vulnerable in ways that made his wolf pace with anticipation. The Alpha King had waited over a century for the right mate. He could wait a little longer to claim what was meant to be his. The Silverbrook research station emerged from the mountain mist like something from a fairy tale, all stone towers and ivy-covered walls nestled against a backdrop of ancient pines. Sarah pressed her face to the transport van's window, drinking in her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The neutral territories felt different from pack lands, wilder somehow, as if the very air hummed with untamed energy. Dr. Elena Cross waited on the station's front steps, a woman in her 50s with prematurely silver hair and eyes that seemed to see too much. Her smile was warm but guarded as she helped Sarah with her single bag. "Welcome to Silverbrook," she said, her voice carrying a faint accent Sarah couldn't place. "I hope you'll find the work here fulfilling. We study things most packs prefer to forget." The station's interior was a maze of narrow corridors lined with bookshelves that stretched to impossibly high ceilings. Ancient texts bound in leather and scales filled every available space, their titles written in languages Sarah didn't recognize. The air smelled of old parchment and something else, something wild and musky that made her damaged wolf stir restlessly. Elena led her through the labyrinth, pointing out various departments. "We have researchers from all supernatural communities here," she explained. "Vampires who study blood magic history, witches documenting spell evolution, even a few Fae scholars working on treaty analyses. You'll be in the bloodline documentation department, tracing pack genealogies and inheritance patterns." Sarah's cabin sat at the station's edge, a cozy stone cottage overlooking a valley that seemed to stretch forever. Inside, everything was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, bookshelves lined another, and large windows offered views of the surrounding wilderness. "You'll find the work absorbing," Elena said, setting a welcome basket on the kitchen counter. "But don't isolate yourself completely. The other researchers are good people and we have communal dinners twice a week." That night, alone for the first time since leaving pack territory, Sarah tried to settle into her new routine. She unpacked her few belongings, arranged her research materials, and attempted to read through the files Elena had provided. But concentration remained elusive. Every sound from the forest beyond her windows made her jump, made her damaged wolf lift its head with something almost like interest. The first gift appeared 3 days later. Sarah emerged from her cabin to find a freshly killed rabbit on her doorstep, its neck cleanly broken and its fur unmarked by scavenger teeth. She looked around the clearing but saw nothing except morning mist rising from the valley below. Probably a local predator marking territory, she told herself, disposing of the carcass in the woods. But the gesture felt too deliberate, too much like an offering. Her work proved as absorbing as Elena had promised. The bloodline records were fascinating, revealing patterns of inheritance and genetic quirks that painted a complex picture of supernatural evolution. Some families carried latent magical abilities that skipped generations. Others showed signs of hybrid ancestry, mixing wolf blood with vampire or fae lineages in ways that created entirely new supernatural categories. But it was the Luna bloodline documentation that truly captured her attention. References to an ancient matriarchal line appeared throughout pack histories, always associated with unusual power and tragic endings. Luna females could supposedly bond with multiple alphas, creating pack alliances that lasted for generations. But they also died young, their bodies unable to contain the supernatural energy of multiple mate bonds. The gifts continued. Every few days, Sarah would find something new on her doorstep. A bundle of rare herbs tied with grass. Polished stones arranged in careful patterns. Once, impossibly, a cluster of winter roses that shouldn't have bloomed for months. Each offering felt more personal than the last, as if someone was learning her preferences and adjusting accordingly. Other researchers mentioned seeing things in the woods. Dr. James Hartwell, a vampire who studied feeding pattern evolution, swore he'd glimpsed something massive moving between the trees during his evening walks. Sarah Chin, a witch documenting spell component harvesting, found oversized paw prints near her cabin that didn't match any known local wildlife. "There's definitely something large out there," she told Sarah over communal dinner. "I've lived in wild places my entire life and I've never seen tracks that size. Whatever made them has to weigh at least 200 pounds. Elena always deflected such conversations with scientific explanations. "Probably a black bear," she would say, "or perhaps someone's lost livestock." The neutral territories attract all sorts of unusual visitors. But Sarah noticed how Elena's eyes darted to the windows when they discussed the mysterious creature, how she insisted everyone be inside by sunset, how she'd installed new security measures that seemed excessive for a research facility. Truth came to Sarah during her 4th week at Silverbrook. She'd been working late in the archives, absorbed in a particularly fascinating bloodline chart, when she realized the building had gone completely silent. Even the usual night sounds from the forest had ceased, as if every living thing was holding its breath. She gathered her materials and headed for the exit, but froze when she reached the main corridor. Through the tall windows that faced the valley, she could see something moving in the moonlight. Something enormous and dark that flowed like liquid shadow between the trees. Sarah pressed herself against the glass, straining to make out details. The creature was definitely Lupin, but larger than any wolf she'd ever seen. Its fur was so dark it seemed to absorb moonlight, and when it turned its head, she caught a glimpse of eyes that glowed like molten gold. Those eyes found hers through the window, and Sarah's breath stopped entirely. The wolf was looking directly at her, its massive head tilted as if studying her reaction. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the distance, predator and prey locked in silent communication. Then the creature turned and melted back into the forest, leaving Sarah wondering if she'd imagined the entire encounter. But she knew she hadn't. Something was out there, something that had been watching her, learning about her, leaving gifts like a suitor courting a mate. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, her damaged wolf stirred with something that felt dangerously like interest. For the first time since the rejection, Sarah felt truly alive. The storm struck Silverbrook with the fury of something personal, as if the sky itself had chosen violence. Wind howled through the valley like a living thing, bending ancient pines until their tops nearly touched the ground. Rain lashed against Sarah's cabin windows with such force she feared the glass might shatter. Power had failed an hour ago, leaving her surrounded by flickering candlelight that cast dancing shadows on the walls. She tried to continue reading, but the storm's intensity made concentration impossible. Every crack of thunder seemed to shake the very foundations of her small sanctuary. Lightning illuminated the clearing in stark white flashes, revealing a world transformed by wind and water. Between the strobing light and driving rain, Sarah thought she glimpsed movement near the tree line. Something large and dark that didn't flee from the storm's violence. The next flash of lightning revealed empty forest. She was reaching for another candle when her front door exploded inward. The man who filled her doorway was soaked to the skin, dark hair plastered against his skull, but he radiated power that made the storm outside seem tame by comparison. Water streamed from his black coat, pooling on her wooden floor, yet he stood utterly still as if the chaos behind him was merely an inconvenience. Sarah's wolf, dormant for weeks, suddenly surged to attention with a mixture of recognition and primal terror. This was an alpha. Not just any alpha, but something far more dangerous. Every instinct screamed at her to submit, to bare her throat, to acknowledge the absolute authority that rolled off him in waves. But her human mind fought back, keeping her frozen in place beside the fireplace. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her bones. "The storm caught me off guard, and your light was visible through the trees." He stepped inside without invitation, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. In the candlelight, his features were sharp and aristocratic, all clean lines and predatory grace. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Golden, like the wolf she'd seen through the window, with an intensity that suggested he saw far more than he revealed. "I'm Adrian," he said simply, as if the name should mean something to her. Sarah found her voice with effort. "Sarah Blackwood. You're welcome to wait out the storm, though I should mention the power is out." A smile played at the corners of his mouth, transforming his stern features into something devastatingly beautiful. "I noticed. Candlelight suits you." Compliments sent heat racing through her veins, followed immediately by confusion. When was the last time anyone had looked at her with appreciation rather than pity? When had anyone made her feel desirable instead of discarded? You work at the research station, Adrian continued, moving closer with fluid grace. Your research on bloodline documentation is quite thorough. Sarah blinked in surprise. You've read my work? I make it my business to know about interesting people in the neutral territories. His golden eyes held hers captive, especially those with such tragic recent histories. The words hit like a physical blow. He knew about the rejection. Somehow, this stranger knew about her humiliation at the Moonrise Festival, about Kai's cruel dismissal, about her exile to these remote mountains. I don't know what you've heard, she began, but Adrian raised a hand to silence her. I heard that a fool rejected his fated mate in front of his entire pack, he said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. I heard that Kai Thornfield chose pride over destiny and left his true mate bleeding on sacred ground. Sarah's breath caught. No one spoke about the rejection so bluntly, with such obvious contempt for Kai's decision. In pack territory, everyone had treated the incident with careful diplomacy, as if acknowledging the cruelty might somehow make it worse. It wasn't meant to be, she whispered, the practiced words falling from her lips like a prayer she no longer believed. Adrian moved closer, close enough that she could smell rain and pine and something wildly masculine that made her wolf pace restlessly. Wasn't it? He asked softly. Or was it simply that Kai Thornfield lacks the strength to claim what the moon goddess offered him? The candles flickered in a sudden draft, throwing Adrian's face into stark relief. For a moment, his features seemed almost feral, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something ancient and predatory lurking beneath his civilized facade. Lightning crashed outside, illuminating the cabin in brilliant white light. In that instant, Sarah could have sworn Adrian's eyes flashed gold, the same molten color she'd seen in the massive wolf that had been stalking the research station. Impossible. Creature she'd glimpsed had been enormous, far too large to be a normal shifter. And this man, despite his obvious alpha status, was still human in form. Are you all right? Adrian asked, and she realized she'd been staring. Fine, she managed. Just tired. The storm is making me jumpy. Understandable. He moved to her small kitchen, helping himself to the kettle with casual familiarity. Storms can bring out the predators. Lucky for you, I happen to be in the area. The way he said predators sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. There was something in his tone, a dark amusement that suggested he knew exactly what kind of predators prowled these mountains. What brings you to the neutral territories? She asked, settling into one of her chairs while he prepared tea with movements that suggested long practice. Business, he replied vaguely. I have interests in various supernatural communities. Research facilities like Silverbrook fall under my purview. His purview. The words were carefully chosen, revealing nothing while implying everything. This wasn't a man who simply had business interests. This was someone who controlled them. Adrian brought her tea in one of her own mugs, but when their fingers brushed during the exchange, electricity shot up her arm. Contact lasted only seconds, but it left her skin tingling and her wolf whimpering with something that felt dangerously like need. You're recovering well, he observed, settling into the chair across from her. From the rejection, I mean. Your wolf is stronger than when you first arrived here. How could he possibly know that? Sarah studied his face, searching for answers in those impossible golden eyes. You seem to know a great deal about me for a stranger. The smile returned, and this time it held a predatory edge that made her pulse quicken. I make it my business to know about exceptional women. And you, Sarah Blackwood, are far more exceptional than you realize. Thunder rolled overhead, but the sound seemed distant now, as if the storm was moving away. Or perhaps Adrian's presence simply made everything else fade into background noise. The way he looked at her with such focused intensity made her feel like the most important thing in his world. It was intoxicating. Dangerous. Absolutely nothing like the casual dismissal she'd grown accustomed to from her former packmates. Power chose that moment to flicker back to life, electric lights banishing the intimate candlelit atmosphere. Adrian glanced at the overhead fixture with what looked like disappointment. "I should go," he said, rising with fluid grace. "The storm has passed and you need your rest." But he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he approached her chair, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. This close, she could see flecks of amber in his golden eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Thank you for the shelter," he said softly, reaching out to touch her cheek with fingers that were surprisingly gentle. "Sleep well, Sarah. Dream of better things than rejection and pain." Touch sent fire racing through her nerves, awakening parts of her that had been dormant since the mate bond severed. For a wild moment, she wanted to lean into that caress, to beg him to stay, to lose herself in the promise she saw in his dangerous eyes. Instead, she sat frozen as he moved to the door, pausing on the threshold to look back at her one final time. "I have a feeling we'll see each other again soon," he said, and then he was gone, disappearing into the night as suddenly as he'd appeared. Sarah remained in her chair for a long time after his departure, touching her cheek where his fingers had lingered. Sighed, the storm had indeed passed, leaving only the gentle sound of rain dripping from the eaves. But inside her cabin, the air still hummed with the memory of his presence, and her wolf paced restlessly, hungry for something she couldn't name. Adrian returned 3 days later, arriving at the research station in a black sedan that gleamed like liquid obsidian in the morning sun. Sarah watched from her office window as he emerged from the vehicle, moving with that same predatory grace she remembered from the storm. Today he wore an expensive charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean build, looking every inch the powerful businessman he claimed to be. But Sarah's wolf knew better. Beneath the civilized exterior lurked something far more dangerous. He found her in the archives, bent over a particularly complex bloodline chart that traced pack alliances through the centuries. The scent of pine and rain announced his presence before he spoke, making her pulse quicken despite her attempts at composure. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying that same low rumble that seemed to resonate in her bones. "I hope you don't mind the interruption. I have some materials that might interest you." He set a leather portfolio on her desk, his fingers brushing hers as she reached for it. Contact sent familiar electricity shooting up her arm, and she noticed how his touch lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Inside the portfolio were documents she'd never seen before, bloodline records from packs that had supposedly lost their histories in various disasters. The information was incredibly valuable, the kind of research gold that historians spent careers searching for. "Where did you find these?" she asked, unable to hide her excitement as she examined the ancient parchments. "I have connections in various supernatural communities," Adrian replied, moving to stand behind her chair. "When I mentioned your work to a colleague, he remembered having these in his private collection." His presence behind her was overwhelming, his body heat warming her back while his scent surrounded her like an invisible embrace. When he leaned over her shoulder to point out a particular entry, his breath stirred the hair at her neck. "This bloodline here," he said, his finger tracing a genealogical line on the parchment. "See how it connects to the original Luna families? Your research on that particular lineage has been remarkably thorough." Sarah tried to focus on the documents, but Adrian's proximity made thinking difficult. The way he said Luna families carried an undertone she couldn't identify, as if the words held personal significance. "These must be worth a fortune," she managed. "I can't possibly accept something so valuable." "Consider it an investment in important research," Adrian said, straightening but not stepping away. "Knowledge belongs to those who can best use it." Over the following weeks, Adrian's visits became a regular occurrence. He arrived bearing rare texts, unusual artifacts, and always some excuse to discuss Sarah's work in detail. Each visit brought increasingly expensive gifts wrapped in the guise of research assistance. A first-edition manuscript on pack law that belonged in a museum. Ancient amber jewelry that supposedly contained trace minerals useful for supernatural genealogy studies. A bottle of wine so rare that Sarah was afraid to open it, claiming it would help her understand the cultural context of blood bonding rituals. Other researchers began to notice the special attention. Dr. Hartwell raised an eyebrow when Adrian brought Sarah lunch from an exclusive restaurant 2 hours away. Sarah Chen made pointed comments about favoritism when Adrian personally delivered a new computer system to Sarah's office. Even the maintenance staff whispered about the mysterious benefactor who seemed so interested in the bloodline department. But it was Dr. Cross who finally voiced the concerns everyone was thinking. She found Sarah working late one evening, surrounded by the gifts Adrian had provided. Elena's expression was troubled as she settled into the chair across from Sarah's desk. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "About Adrian Nightfall." The surname hit Sarah like a physical blow. Nightfall. She'd heard that name before, whispered in the same tones reserved for legends and nightmares. Adrian Nightfall, Elena continued, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. The Alpha King. Ruler of all North American packs for the past century. One of the most powerful supernatural beings alive. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down the manuscript she'd been reading. The Alpha King. No wonder her wolf responded to him with such intense submission. No wonder his very presence seemed to command the air around him. "He's been courting you," Elena said gently. "And I'm concerned about what that means for your safety." "Courting me?" Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "But he said he was here on business, that research facilities fall under his purview." "They do. He owns most of the neutral territories, including this station. But his interest in you is clearly personal." Elena leaned forward, her expression grave. "Sarah, I need you to understand something about Adrian Nightfall's history with women." That night, alone in her cabin, Sarah researched everything she could find about the Alpha King. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Adrian Nightfall had ruled the supernatural world for over a century, accumulating power and territory with ruthless efficiency. But it was his romantic history that painted the darkest picture. Over the decades, he'd taken numerous companions, always beautiful, always from lower-ranking families, always women who seemed to simply disappear from public record after a few years. The official explanations varied. Some had supposedly died in accidents. Others had chosen exile from supernatural society. A few had simply vanished without explanation, their fates unknown and uninvestigated. Pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. Adrian collected women like rare artifacts, treasuring them intensely before growing bored and moving on. The difference was that his discarded lovers didn't survive the experience. Yet even knowing this, Sarah found herself looking forward to his visits with anticipation that bordered on addiction. When he touched her hand while pointing out details in ancient texts, her skin burned for hours afterward. When he smiled at her insights, she felt more valued than she had in months. When he looked at her with those impossible golden eyes, she felt beautiful and desired instead of rejected and worthless. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings about predators and patterns, about powerful men who consumed what they desired. But her heart, still wounded from Kai's rejection, craved the attention Adrian showered on her. He made her feel special, chosen, worthy of devotion from someone who could have anyone. After a lifetime of being overlooked and a rejection that had shattered her self-worth, Adrian's interest felt like salvation, even if it might ultimately prove to be her destruction. The next morning brought Adrian's most extravagant gift yet, a collection of Luna bloodline artifacts that belonged in the supernatural equivalent of the Smithsonian. As Sarah examined the priceless relics, she couldn't help but wonder if she was looking at her own future treasures. Beautiful objects collected by a powerful man, admired briefly, then stored away when something newer caught his attention. But when Adrian arrived that afternoon and smiled at her with genuine warmth, when he asked about her research with obvious respect for her intelligence, when he touched her cheek with gentle fingers and called her remarkable, all her logical fears evaporated like morning mist. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps she was special enough to hold the Alpha King's interest. Perhaps her damaged heart had finally found someone who would never reject her. The hope was as dangerous as it was intoxicating, and Sarah found herself drowning in it willingly. The dreams began the night after Adrian's third visit, vivid and consuming in ways that left Sarah gasping awake with her heart racing and her skin flushed with desire. In sleep, she found herself deep in moonlit forests where a massive black wolf stalked through silver shadows, its golden eyes burning with primal hunger. Creature was enormous, far larger than any natural wolf, with midnight fur that seemed to absorb starlight and muscles that rippled beneath its coat like liquid power. When it looked at her in the dreams, Sarah felt recognition click into place with devastating certainty. This was no ordinary predator. This was something ancient and magnificent and utterly focused on claiming her. In the dream realm, she didn't flee. Instead, she moved toward the beast with surrender that felt more natural than breathing. When powerful jaws closed gently around her throat, when sharp teeth pressed against her pulse point without breaking skin, when the wolf's weight settled over her in perfect dominance, Sarah felt more complete than she ever had in waking life. The dreams always ended the same way, with phantom sensations of fur beneath her fingers and the taste of pine and earth on her lips. She would wake aching with need that no amount of cold water could wash away, her damaged wolf stirring with interest it hadn't shown since the rejection. During daylight hours, Adrian's seduction intensified with calculated precision. He arrived bearing increasingly elaborate gestures designed to demonstrate his power and resources. Private helicopter rides over territories that stretched beyond the horizon, all of which he casually mentioned owning. Dinners at exclusive restaurants where staff treated him with the deference reserved for royalty. Tours of ancient pack sites where he shared stories that could only come from someone who had witnessed the events firsthand. "You're older than you look," Sarah observed during one such excursion, studying his face for signs of the century he claimed to have lived. Adrian's smile held secrets that made her pulse quicken. "Supernatural genetics have their advantages," he replied, reaching across the helicopter's cabin to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Touch lingered, his thumb tracing her jawline with possessive gentleness. "Some of us age very slowly when we find reasons to stay vital." The implications in his words made her breath catch. Was he suggesting she was his reason for remaining young? The thought should have seemed ridiculous, but the intensity in his golden eyes made it feel like gospel truth. Each interaction grew more intimate, more charged with tension that made the air between them practically hum with electricity. Adrian found excuses to touch her constantly. A hand at the small of her back as he guided her through doorways. Fingers brushing hers when he passed documents. Casual contact that sent fire racing through her nervous system and left her craving more. But it was the way other supernatural beings reacted to his scent on her that truly drove home the danger of her situation. When pack representatives visited the research station, their responses to Sarah's presence became increasingly troubling. Wolves who had previously treated her with casual courtesy now approached with obvious nervousness, their nostrils flaring as they caught Adrian's lingering essence on her skin and clothes. Dr. Reyes, a pack historian from the Eastern Territories, actually backed away when Sarah entered the conference room. His face went pale as he scented the air around her, and she caught him whispering urgently to his assistant about territorial markings and predator warnings. During a break in their meeting, she overheard two visiting researchers discussing her situation in hushed voices outside the ladies' room. "Can you smell it on her?" one asked, her voice tight with concern. "The Alpha King's scent is all over that girl." "Poor thing probably has no idea what she's gotten herself into," the other replied. "Did you see how she lit up when someone mentioned his name? She's completely under his spell. You know what happened to the last one, don't you?" The first voice dropped to barely a whisper. Disappeared without a trace. One day she was living in his compound, wearing his gifts, playing the perfect companion. The next day it was like she never existed. "They always think they're special," the second voice said sadly. "They always believe they'll be the one to hold his interest permanently. But the king's obsessions burn bright and brief. When he grows bored, well, let's just say his former lovers don't tend to relocate to somewhere tropical." Sarah pressed herself against the bathroom wall, her blood turning to ice as the implications sank in. She wasn't the first woman to catch Adrian's attention. There had been others, women who had received his gifts and basked in his focused interest, women who had believed themselves chosen and special. Women who had vanished when his fascination faded. That night, she tried to research Adrian's previous companions more thoroughly, but found herself frustrated by the lack of concrete information. Official records were sparse and sanitized, mentioning women only in passing before they seemed to simply evaporate from documented existence. But she did find photographs in old Supernatural Society magazines, images of Adrian at various functions over the decades with different beautiful women at his side. A redhead with emerald eyes who appeared in pictures from the 1970s before vanishing from all subsequent coverage. A blonde with aristocratic features who showed up in 1990s social pages for exactly 2 years. A brunette with exotic beauty who graced party photos throughout the early 2000s before disappearing entirely. All of them gorgeous. All of them gazing at Adrian with obvious adoration. All of them seemingly erased from existence after their brief moment in his spotlight. Yet despite the mounting evidence of danger, Sarah found herself anticipating Adrian's visits with addiction that bordered on pathological. When he looked at her with those burning golden eyes, when he spoke to her with genuine respect for her intelligence, when he touched her with reverent gentleness, all rational thought fled. He made her feel precious, desired, worthy of devotion from someone who commanded the supernatural world. After months of rejection and isolation, Adrian's attention felt like coming back to life. The fact that it might ultimately lead to her destruction seemed almost irrelevant compared to the joy of feeling wanted again. Her dreams grew more intense, more explicitly sexual, blurring the lines between sleeping and waking desire. The Black Wolf claimed her in increasingly vivid scenarios, marking her as his own with possessive thoroughness that left her breathless. Sometimes she woke to find herself calling out his name, her body arched in desperate need for touch that never came. The rational part of her mind whispered warnings about patterns and predators, about powerful men who consumed what they desired without thought for the consequences. But her wounded heart craved the validation Adrian provided, the sense of being special and chosen that helped heal the trauma of Kai's rejection. Even knowing she was likely walking toward her own destruction, Sarah found herself unable to resist the pull of Adrian's dangerous magnetism. Like a moth drawn to flame, she moved inexorably toward the heat that would either transform her or destroy her. The only question was which outcome would claim her first. Sarah was cataloging a collection of Luna bloodline artifacts when the delegation arrived, 3 black SUVs winding up the mountain road in perfect formation. Through her office window, she watched as pack members emerged from the vehicles, their movements coordinated with military precision. Her breath caught when she recognized the figure leading them. Kai Thornfield stepped from the lead vehicle like something from her worst nightmares, his familiar form triggering a cascade of memories she'd worked so hard to bury. He looked older somehow, his boyish features sharpened by responsibility and stress. The Beta heir carried himself with new authority, but his eyes held shadows that hadn't been there at the Moonrise Festival. Behind him came his father, Beta Marcus Thornfield, along with several pack enforcers whose presence suggested this wasn't a social visit. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down the ancient chalice she'd been examining, her damaged wolf stirring with confused emotions she didn't want to examine. Dr. Cross appeared in her doorway within minutes, her expression carefully neutral. "We have visitors from your former pack," she said gently. "They've requested a meeting with you specifically." Sarah followed Elena to the main conference room, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. She hadn't seen Kai since that terrible night at the festival, hadn't spoken to anyone from her birth pack since accepting the transfer to Silverbrook. The sight of him sitting at the polished table, hands clasped before him like a supplicant, sent conflicting waves of pain and anger through her system. "Sarah," he said, rising when she entered. His voice carried the same warm timbre she remembered, but now it held notes of desperation that made her wolf whine in confusion. "You look well." She took the seat across from him, keeping the table between them like a barrier. "What brings you to the neutral territories, Kai?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Kai's father shifted uncomfortably beside his son, his weathered face creased with worry. "We've come to warn you," Beta Marcus said without preamble, "about the Alpha King's interest in you." The words hit like a physical blow. How did they know about Adrian? Sarah kept her expression carefully blank, unwilling to confirm or deny anything. "His scent is all over this place," Kai said, his nostrils flaring with obvious agitation. "All over you." He leaned forward, intensity radiating from his every line. "Sarah, you have to understand, Adrian Nightfall is dangerous in ways you can't imagine." Protectiveness in his voice sent rage blazing through her chest. How dare he? How dare he come here after publicly rejecting her, after humiliating her in front of their entire pack, and presume to offer warnings about her choices? "You rejected me," she said, her voice low and deadly calm. "You declared me unworthy in front of everyone who mattered to me. You don't get to have opinions about my life anymore." Pain flashed across Kai's features, but he pressed forward with stubborn determination. "I rejected you to protect you," he said desperately. "Pack's Elder Council received prophecies about your bloodline, about the danger it would attract. I thought if I severed our bond publicly, if I made it clear you belong to no one, it might keep you safe." Sarah stared at him in shock. Prophecies? About her bloodline? The Luna artifacts she'd been studying suddenly took on new significance, their presence at Silverbrook no longer seeming quite so coincidental. "What kind of prophecies?" she asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Beta Marcus leaned forward, his expression grave. Ancient bloodlines calling to ancient powers. The return of the Luna Queens and the kings who would claim them. War among the supernatural factions for control of that power. Before Sarah could respond, the conference room door opened with deliberate slowness. Adrian stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding every eye in the room. He was dressed in an immaculate black suit that emphasized his predatory grace, and his golden eyes held a cold satisfaction that made Sarah's breath catch. "Gentlemen," he said pleasantly, though his voice carried undertones of barely leashed violence, "I wasn't aware we were expecting visitors from the Thornfield pack." Kai rose slowly, every muscle in his body tensed for conflict. His father placed a restraining hand on his arm, but the younger wolf shook him off with barely contained aggression. "Alpha King," Kai said, the title dripping with barely concealed hostility. "We've come to collect what belongs to our pack." Adrian's smile was all sharp edges and predatory amusement. "How interesting. And what, exactly, do you believe belongs to your pack in my territory?" Sarah watched the two alphas circle each other like wolves preparing for battle, the air between them crackling with supernatural tension. Despite Kai's obvious strength, he seemed almost diminished next to Adrian's commanding presence. It was like watching a house cat face off against a panther. "Sarah was born into our pack," Kai said, his voice rising with desperation. "She's under our protection, our responsibility. We won't allow you to harm her." "Harm her?" Adrian's laugh held genuine amusement. "Young pup, you seem to be laboring under several misapprehensions. First, Sarah chose to leave your pack after you publicly rejected and humiliated her. Second, she's in my territory under my protection now. And third," Adrian's eyes began to glow with inner fire, "you have no idea what she truly is." Temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Adrian's power filled the space. Sarah felt her wolf instinctively submit to his authority, even as her human mind recoiled from the display of dominance. "What I am," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the supernatural tension. Adrian turned to her, his expression softening with something that might have been affection. "You're descended from the original Luna bloodline, my dear. The first wolves who could bond with multiple alphas, creating pack alliances that shaped the supernatural world for centuries." The words hit the room like a bomb. Beta Marcus went pale, while Kai stumbled backward as if physically struck. "That's impossible," Kai breathed. "The Luna bloodlines died out generations ago." Adrian's smile turned predatory. "Did they? Or did they simply learn to hide, to blend into lesser bloodlines until the time was right for their return?" He moved closer to Sarah, his presence wrapping around her like a physical embrace. The power you've been sensing, the way your wolf responds to supernatural energy, the reason every alpha who encounters you feels the pull of recognition. You're not just any rejected mate, Sarah. You're the key to reshaping the entire supernatural hierarchy. Sarah felt the world tilting around her as the implications sank in. Her research into Luna bloodlines hadn't been academic curiosity. It had been her own heritage calling to her, her blood recognizing the truth her mind couldn't accept. And that, Adrian continued, his golden eyes boring into Kai's with obvious satisfaction, is why she belongs with me. A Luna queen needs an alpha king, not some beta's son who lacks the vision to recognize what fate placed in his hands. The insult hit its mark. With a snarl of pure rage, Kai lunged across the table toward Adrian, his wolf surging to the surface in a blur of supernatural speed. Adrian caught him mid-leap with casual ease, one hand wrapped around Kai's throat as he held the younger wolf suspended in the air. The display of power was terrifying in its effortlessness. "Child," Adrian said conversationally while Kai struggled in his grip, "you should learn to control your temper. Makes you sloppy." He released Kai, who collapsed to his knees gasping for breath. Beta Marcus and the pack enforcers moved to help him, but their faces showed they understood exactly how outmatched they were. "Take your delegation and leave my territory," Adrian commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "And don't return. Sarah has made her choice." But as the Thornfield pack retreated in defeat, Sarah couldn't help but notice the satisfaction in Adrian's golden eyes. He had gotten exactly what he wanted from this confrontation. Question was whether she was strong enough to survive being the prize in a game whose rules she was only beginning to understand. Dr. Elena Cross found Sarah in the archives 3 hours after the confrontation, sitting motionless among scattered Luna bloodline documents. The older woman's face carried an expression Sarah had never seen before, a mixture of guilt and resignation that immediately set off warning bells. "We need to talk," Elena said, closing the archive door behind her with deliberate care. "About why you're really here." Sarah looked up from the genealogy charts she'd been staring at without seeing. The adrenaline from watching two alphas nearly tear each other apart had faded, leaving her feeling hollow and confused. "What do you mean?" Elena moved to the window, her back turned as she spoke. "Your assignment to Silverbrook wasn't random, Sarah. None of this has been random. Your transfer request, your placement in bloodline documentation, even your specific research into Luna lineages. It was all carefully orchestrated." The words hit like ice water in Sarah's veins. "Orchestrated by whom?" Elena turned, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "By Adrian Nightfall. I work for him, Sarah. I have for the past 30 years. My job here isn't just running a research facility. It's monitoring supernatural bloodlines, tracking genetic anomalies, and most importantly, identifying descendants of extinct power lines." Sarah felt the world shift beneath her feet. "You've been watching me, studying me, reporting to him about my work, my progress, my personal life. Your bloodline research triggered several genetic markers we've been monitoring for decades," Elena continued, her voice thick with regret. "Markers that suggested possible Luna heritage. When you requested transfer after the rejection, Adrian saw an opportunity to bring you somewhere he could observe you more closely." The rejection. Sarah's mind raced, connecting dots she'd been too naive to see before. Did he orchestrate that too? Did he somehow influence Kai to reject me publicly? Elena shook her head. That was genuine, though Adrian certainly took advantage of the opportunity it provided. Kai's rejection made you vulnerable, isolated, perfect for Adrian's purposes. And what purposes are those? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Elena moved to the ancient texts scattered across Sarah's desk, her fingers tracing the Luna bloodline genealogies with reverent care. "Do you understand what these documents really represent? Not just historical curiosities, but a roadmap to power that could reshape the entire supernatural world." She opened one of the oldest manuscripts, revealing illuminated pages that depicted wolves of extraordinary size and beauty. The original Luna bloodline females could bond with multiple alphas simultaneously, creating pack alliances that lasted for generations. Their children inherited enhanced abilities from both parents, becoming stronger, faster, more magically gifted than ordinary wolves. But there was a price, Elena continued, turning to a page that showed a woman in obvious agony. Luna bloodline females often died in childbirth. Their bodies couldn't contain the supernatural energy of multiple mate bonds, especially when carrying children who inherited those same volatile powers. Sarah stared at the horrific illustrations, images of women whose bodies were literally torn apart by the forces they carried. How many died? Most of them, Elena said quietly. Which is why the bloodline was believed extinct. The few Luna females who survived learned to hide their heritage, to dilute their blood through generations of careful breeding until the power lay dormant. Until me, Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her like poison. Till you, Elena confirmed. Your research into your own genealogy, your instinctive understanding of bloodline patterns, your wolf's unusual responses to supernatural energy. All signs that the Luna power was awakening in you. Sarah thought about her dreams, the way her wolf had responded to Adrian's presence, the strange pull she felt towards supernatural mysteries she'd always attributed to academic curiosity. It had been her blood calling to her, her heritage asserting itself despite generations of careful suppression. Adrian has been searching for a surviving Luna descendant for decades, Elena continued. He believes such a mate could enhance his own power exponentially, allow him to control not just North American wolf packs but all supernatural creatures. Control them how? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Through the bond, Elena explained. A Luna's connection to multiple alphas creates a network of supernatural influence. If Adrian could claim a Luna mate, he could theoretically extend his authority through that network to every supernatural being she's ever touched, ever influenced, ever bonded with even temporarily. The implications were staggering. Adrian wasn't just seeking a powerful mate. He was seeking a weapon, a living conduit through which he could dominate the entire supernatural world. But the pregnancy risk, Sarah said desperately. Surely he wouldn't want to lose his mate to childbirth. Elena's expression grew even more troubled. There are ancient rituals, dark magic practices that might allow a Luna to survive pregnancy. But they require tremendous sacrifice, usually from other supernatural beings. Adrian has been collecting supernatural artifacts for decades, preparing for the possibility of finding his Luna mate. Sarah felt sick as she remembered all the gifts Adrian had brought her. The priceless artifacts he'd claimed were for research purposes. He hadn't been courting her with romantic gestures. He'd been gathering the magical components needed to keep her alive long enough to serve his purposes. Everything has been a lie, she whispered, her voice breaking. The research position, your mentorship, even my escape from pack territory after the rejection. All of it designed to deliver me into his hands. Not everything, Elena said urgently. My care for you, my concern for your well-being, that's real. Which is why I'm telling you this now, while there's still time to run. Run where? Sarah asked bitterly. He's the Alpha King. He controls most of the supernatural world. Where could I possibly go that he wouldn't find me? There are places, Elena insisted. Neutral territories he doesn't control, supernatural communities that resist his authority. The Fae courts, the vampire covens, even some of the witch circles would offer protection to keep a Luna out of his hands. Sarah stared at the manuscripts spread before her, at the faces of women who had loved and suffered and died for powers they never asked for. Was that her fate? To spend her life running from a man who saw her as nothing more than a tool for his ambitions? Or to submit to those ambitions and become complicit in reshaping the supernatural world according to his will? Elena gripped her shoulders, forcing Sarah to meet her eyes. You have more power than you realize, she said urgently. Luna bloodline females weren't just victims of their heritage. They were leaders, queens who shaped supernatural society for centuries. You don't have to be Adrian's weapon. You could choose to be your own. But even as Elena spoke those encouraging words, Sarah could feel Adrian's presence approaching. His scent reached her through the archive's thick walls, that intoxicating combination of pine and rain and ancient power that made her wolf whimper with recognition. He was coming for her, and despite everything she'd just learned, despite the manipulation and lies and calculated seduction, part of her still yearned to surrender to his dangerous embrace. The door opened without a knock, and Adrian filled the doorway like a force of nature. His golden eyes swept the room, taking in the scattered manuscripts and Elena's guilty expression with predatory intelligence. "Ladies," he said pleasantly, though his voice carried undertones that made both women tense. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Elena stepped protectively in front of Sarah, but they both knew it was a futile gesture. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from the Alpha King who had orchestrated every moment of this encounter. Adrian's smile held the satisfaction of a hunter whose trap had finally sprung. "Now, my dear Sarah, I believe it's time we had a more honest conversation about your future." The attack came at dawn, when the mist still clung to the valley floor and most of the research station slept in peaceful ignorance. Sarah jerked awake to the sound of shattering glass and inhuman screams that seemed to pour from every direction at once. Through her cabin window, she could see dark shapes moving with supernatural speed between the buildings. Some were clearly vampires, their pale forms blurring as they scaled walls with spider-like agility. Others moved with the fluid grace of shifted wolves, but their scents were wrong, foreign, carrying the acrid tang of magic rather than natural musk. Witches, she realized with growing horror. Multiple supernatural factions had converged on Silverbrook simultaneously, their coordinated assault suggesting weeks of careful planning. Elena's voice crackled through the emergency communication system. "All personnel to safe rooms immediately. This is not a drill. Pete, all personnel to designated safe areas." But Sarah's safe room was across the compound, past buildings now swarming with attackers who moved with deadly purpose. Through her window, she watched Dr. Hartwell attempt to reach the main building only to be intercepted by 3 vampires whose fangs gleamed in the pre-dawn light. She was trapped, surrounded by enemies who had come specifically for her. The front door of her cabin exploded inward in a shower of splinters. A witch stood in the doorway, her eyes glowing with eldritch power and her hands wreathed in flames that cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Luna child," the witch hissed, her voice carrying unnatural harmonics that made Sarah's teeth ache. "Your bloodline ends tonight." Before the witch could strike, a massive black shape hurtled through the shattered doorway. Adrian's wolf form was even more terrifying in person than in her dreams, a creature of shadow and muscle that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His jaws closed around the witch's throat with a wet crunch that ended her chanting mid-syllable. Transition from wolf to human happened so quickly Sarah almost missed it. One moment Adrian was tearing out the witch's throat, the next he stood naked and blood spattered in her doorway, golden eyes blazing with primal fury. "More are coming," he said, his voice rough with barely contained violence. "Stay behind me." They emerged into chaos. The research station had become a battleground where supernatural creatures fought with savage intensity. Sarah watched in horrified fascination as Adrian moved through the attackers like a force of nature, his bare hands tearing through enemies with efficiency that spoke of centuries of combat experience. A vampire lunged at them from the left, fangs extended and claws ready to rend flesh. Adrian caught the creature mid-leap, his fingers closing around its throat with crushing force. The vampire's neck snapped with a sound like breaking kindling, and Adrian tossed the body aside without breaking stride. 2 more vampires attacked in concert, trying to flank them from opposite sides. Adrian's response was brutally elegant. He spun between their attacks, one hand catching the first vampire's wrist and twisting until bone cracked. The creature's agonized scream was cut short when Adrian's other hand punched through its chest, emerging from the other side with the vampire's heart still beating in his grip. The second vampire hesitated, clearly reconsidering its attack strategy. Adrian's smile was all sharp teeth and predatory hunger as he crushed the stolen heart in his fist, blood running between his fingers like wine. The vampire fled. But even Adrian's supernatural prowess couldn't be everywhere at once. A group of witches had cornered Dr. Cross near the main building, their combined magic creating a barrier of crackling energy that prevented escape. Sarah watched helplessly as the women raised their hands in unison, power building between them like gathering storm clouds. "Elena," she breathed, starting forward despite the danger. Adrian's arms snaked around her waist, pulling her back against his blood-slicked chest. "Don't," he growled in her ear. She knew the risks when she chose to work for me. Casual dismissal of Elena's life sent rage blazing through Sarah's chest. "How can you say that? She's been protecting me, helping me understand what I am." "She's been doing her job," Adrian corrected, his grip tightening possessively. "Just as I'm doing mine now." The witch's spell reached its crescendo, power erupting in a pillar of white-hot energy that consumed everything within a 20-foot radius. When the light faded, nothing remained where Dr. Cross had been standing except scorched earth and the acrid smell of burned magic. Sarah's knees buckled, grief and horror overwhelming her senses. Elena had died protecting her, had died because Adrian's obsession with claiming a Luna mate had painted a target on everyone associated with Sarah's bloodline. The surviving attackers began to retreat, apparently deciding that Adrian's presence made their mission too costly to continue. But their withdrawal felt more like a tactical regrouping than genuine defeat. They had tested his defenses, learned his capabilities, and now they would plan accordingly for the next assault. Adrian surveyed the carnage with satisfaction, his naked form painted with the blood of their enemies. In the growing daylight, he looked less like a man and more like some ancient god of war, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "It's over," he said, finally releasing his grip on Sarah's waist. "For now." "Over?" Sarah stared at the smoking ruins of buildings she called home, at the bodies scattered across ground that had been peaceful just hours before. "Elena is dead. Half the research staff is dead. How is any of this over?" Adrian's expression softened as he cupped her face in his blood-stained hands. "They came for you," he said gently. "Every supernatural faction that opposes my rule sees your awakening Luna powers as either a weapon to claim or a threat to eliminate. This was inevitable the moment your heritage manifested." His thumb traced her cheekbone with surprising tenderness, leaving a smear of crimson across her pale skin. "But I protected you," he continued, his voice dropping to that hypnotic rumble that made her wolf whimper with recognition. "I will always protect you because you belong to me now." The possessive certainty in his words should have terrified her. Instead, Sarah found herself leaning into his touch, craving the safety his presence promised even as her rational mind recoiled from the violence she'd witnessed. "This is what loving me means," Adrian said, seeming to read her thoughts. "Blood and death and enemies who will never stop coming. Are you strong enough for that reality, my Luna?" Looking into his golden eyes, seeing the savage protectiveness burning there alongside something that might have been genuine affection, Sarah realized she was already lost. The careful seduction, the patient manipulation, the displays of power and wealth, all of it had been leading to this moment when she would have to choose between safety and surrender. But there was no safety anymore. The supernatural world knew what she was now, knew the power she carried in her blood. Whether she accepted Adrian's claim or not, she would spend the rest of her life running from those who would use her or destroy her. At least with Adrian, she wouldn't be running alone. "I'm strong enough," she whispered, the words sealing her fate as surely as any mating bond. Adrian's smile was triumphant and possessive and tinged with something that looked almost like relief. "Then let me claim you properly," he said, his voice rough with desperate need. "Let me make you mine before anyone else tries to take you from me." As he lowered his head toward her throat, Sarah caught a glimpse of his elongated canines and realized that her choice had been an illusion all along. Adrian had been planning this moment since the night he'd first appeared in her cabin, had orchestrated every encounter to bring them to this point of inevitable surrender. She was about to become the Alpha King's mate, whether she truly wanted it or not. Adrian's compound rose from the mountainside like a medieval fortress carved from black stone, its towers and battlements designed to withstand both natural disasters and supernatural assault. As their helicopter circled the landing pad, Sarah caught glimpses of defensive measures that spoke of centuries of paranoia: silver-inlaid walls that would repel vampires, iron gates warded against fey magic, and grounds that hummed with protective enchantments. "This is your new home," Adrian said as they descended, his hand possessive on her knee. "Every luxury you could desire, every protection money and power can provide." But as they landed, Sarah noticed the subtle details that revealed the compound's true nature. Guards stationed at every entrance, their eyes tracking her movements with predatory intensity. Security cameras that followed their progress from the landing pad to the main building. Electronic locks on every door that required Adrian's personal authorization to open. This wasn't a home. It was a gilded cage designed to keep something precious and dangerous from escaping. The interior was breathtaking in its opulence. All marble floors and crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow patterns across walls hung with priceless artwork. But Sarah's wolf sensed the underlying wrongness immediately. This place reeked of fear, of women who had walked these halls before her and left behind only the echo of their terror. Adrian led her through corridors lined with portraits of beautiful women from different eras, each painted with the same expression of adoration and submission. His previous companions, Sarah realized with growing horror, preserved in oil and canvas long after their physical forms had vanished from existence. "Your quarters," Adrian announced, opening a door to reveal a suite that belonged in a luxury hotel. Everything had been prepared for her arrival: closets filled with expensive clothing in her exact size, jewelry that sparkled with supernatural enhancement, even personal items from her cabin at Silverbrook carefully arranged on the dressing table. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked, running her fingers over a silk dress that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Adrian's smile held dark satisfaction. "Since the moment I learned of your existence. Every detail has been considered, every contingency planned for. You'll want for nothing here, my Luna." Except freedom, Sarah thought but didn't say. The unspoken truth hung between them like a blade. Over the following days, Adrian's behavior grew increasingly possessive and erratic. He insisted on escorting her everywhere, his hand never leaving some part of her body as if physical contact was necessary to maintain his claim. Meals were brought to her room rather than eaten in the communal dining areas, isolating her from the few other residents of the compound. When she asked to explore the grounds alone, Adrian's golden eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Not safe," he said, his voice carrying absolute finality. "There are too many who would hurt you to get to me." But Sarah suspected the real danger came from within. She'd caught glimpses of Adrian's true nature during their helicopter conversations, moments when his civilized mask slipped to reveal something ancient and predatory underneath. He spoke of her wolf directly now, using his alpha authority to compel her submission in ways that left her feeling violated and helpless. She looks at him, this man who once held her heart, and feels nothing but pity. He can't understand transformation that comes from love rather than force, growth that springs from acceptance rather than demand. "They didn't make me into something I'm not," she says quietly. "They helped me become who I've always been." Agent Chen signals to her team, and weapons rise to firing positions. "Miss Hayes, step away from the creatures. We're here to rescue you." "Rescue me from what?" "From being loved? From being protected? From finding a family that accepts me exactly as I am? From being turned into one of them," Marcus shouts. "Can't you see what they're doing to you? You're becoming a monster." The word hangs in the air like a curse. Monster. The label humans have always used for things they don't understand, can't control, refuse to accept. Meredith feels her own transformation beginning, power flowing through her body like liquid lightning. Not the partial change she's been experiencing, but something complete and irreversible. Her human form falls away like an old skin, revealing something new, something unprecedented. She becomes neither fully human nor fully wolf, but a bridge between worlds. Her body shifts into a form that's beautiful and terrible, powerful and graceful, utterly beyond the boundaries that once defined her existence. The agents stumble backward, their weapons wavering between targets as they confront something their training never prepared them for. Agent Chen's professional composure cracks as she realizes they're not dealing with ordinary shapeshifters anymore. "What are you?" she whispers. Meredith looks at her with eyes that now burn with amber fire, her voice carrying the authority of someone who's transcended the limitations that once bound her. "I'm what happens when love breaks the rules," she says. "I'm proof that some bonds are stronger than the laws that try to contain them." Outside, more vehicles arrive. Military helicopters circle overhead. The situation has escalated beyond anything Agent Chen can handle with standard protocols. But inside the abandoned store, surrounded by impossible beings who've chosen love over safety, Meredith finally understands who she was always meant to become. Not a victim to be rescued, not a human to be protected, but something entirely new. Something that will change the world's understanding of what's possible when two souls refuse to be separated by the boundaries of species, law, or fear itself. The real transformation has only just begun. The standoff in Silver Creek stretches through dawn and into the harsh mountain morning. Military helicopters circle overhead like mechanical vultures while Agent Chen coordinates with superiors whose voices crackle through encrypted radio channels. The abandoned mining town has become a battlefield where the future of human-shifter relations will be decided by people who've never experienced the bond Meredith shares with Cade. "Washington wants a clean resolution," Agent Chen announces after ending her latest call. Her professional mask has returned, but Meredith can see the strain beneath it. No media coverage, no public panic, no evidence that supernatural beings exist among the civilian population. "What does that mean for us?" Meredith asks, though she already knows the answer will be terrible. "Relocation to a secure facility for study and containment," Agent Chen says with clinical detachment. "The shapeshifters will be housed in specialized environments designed for their needs. You'll receive the best psychiatric care available for supernatural influence recovery." The euphemisms can't disguise what they're really describing. Prison sentences for loving each other. Separation that will destroy the very bonds that have made them whole. "And if we refuse?" Cade's voice carries the harmonics of barely contained power. His transformed state radiates authority that makes even the hardened agents nervous. Then Washington authorizes more permanent solutions. Agent Chen's hand rests on her sidearm, the gesture speaking volumes about how expendable they've become. Through their mental connection, Meredith feels Cade's anguish. Not fear for himself, but devastating grief at the thought of losing her after finally finding his mate. The depth of his love, the certainty of their bond, flows through her consciousness like molten gold. Marcus pushes forward, his face flushed with righteous determination. "Just take her, Agent Chen. Leave the animals and take Meredith somewhere she can get help. She's not one of them yet. She can still be saved." "Saved from what?" Meredith rounds on him, her transformation making her voice resonate with supernatural authority. "From being loved unconditionally? From finding my true family? From becoming more than your small world ever allowed me to be? From becoming a monster?" Marcus shouts, his composure finally cracking completely. "Look at yourself, Meredith. Look at what you've become. Your parents wouldn't even recognize you." The words hit like physical blows because part of them contains truth. She has changed beyond recognition, transformed into something that exists between human and wolf, civilization and wildness. The woman who planned Marcus's wedding, who worried about matching China patterns and career advancement, is gone forever. But in her place stands someone stronger, someone who knows her own worth, someone who's found love that doesn't require her to diminish herself to be acceptable. "You're right," she says quietly. "They wouldn't recognize me. But that's because I'm finally becoming who I was always meant to be. Agent Chen checks her watch with professional precision. The full moon rises in 6 hours. Our intelligence indicates that shapeshifter bonds reach critical intensity during lunar events. If we're going to separate you safely, it needs to happen before then. Timeline hits Meredith like a countdown to execution. 6 hours until the moment when Cade's nature will demand completion of their bond. 6 hours to decide between accepting the claiming bite that will transform her completely or watching both of them die from the severed connection. There's another option, Dr. Elena Voss says, appearing in the doorway with the kind of dramatic timing that suggests she's been listening for the perfect moment to make her entrance. Every weapon in the room swings toward her, but Elena raises her hands with calm authority. Agent Chen, I'm Dr. Elena Voss, Special Consultant on Supernatural Affairs. I have federal authorization to negotiate on behalf of the shapeshifter community. Agent Chen's expression shifts from suspicion to recognition. Dr. Voss, I wasn't aware you'd been assigned to this case. Washington called me in when it became clear we were dealing with an unprecedented situation. Elena's gaze moves to Meredith's transformed state with obvious fascination. A human shifter hybrid of this magnitude hasn't been documented in over 2 centuries. Hybrid. Meredith looks at her hands, seeing the way they shift between human fingers and something more claw-like. What am I becoming? Something extraordinary, Elena says, stepping closer despite the weapons trained on her. Your bond with the Alpha isn't just romantic, Meredith. It's evolutionary. You're developing into a bridge species, something that can exist in both worlds without losing the essential nature of either. Agent Chen's radio crackles with urgent chatter. More vehicles are arriving, military transports that suggest Washington has decided subtlety is no longer an option. Dr. Voss, unless your solution involves immediate compliance with federal containment protocols, we're out of time, Agent Chen says. My solution involves recognizing that some things are more powerful than federal protocols, Elena replies. The bond between these two transcends normal shapeshifter dynamics. Tempting to break it won't just kill them. It could trigger a cascade reaction that affects every supernatural being on the continent. The statement hangs in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Meredith feels Cade's shock through their connection, followed by understanding that carries the weight of ancient knowledge. She's right, Cade says, his voice rough with emotion. If our bond is severed violently, it could unravel the barriers that keep the supernatural world hidden from human awareness. Every shifter, every magical being, every creature that exists in the shadows would be exposed simultaneously. Agent Chen's professional composure finally cracks. You're talking about supernatural revelation on a global scale. I'm talking about the end of secrecy, Elena confirms. Which might not be such a terrible thing. Perhaps it's time for both worlds to stop pretending the other doesn't exist. The military transports pull into the abandoned town with mechanical precision. Soldiers emerge wearing gear designed for supernatural containment, equipment that hums with energy fields and electromagnetic suppressors. Last chance, Agent Chen says, her hand moving to her radio. Surrender now or face the consequences. Meredith looks at Cade, at Luna and Ash, at the family she's chosen over every safe, acceptable option her old life offered. Through their bond, she feels his love, his absolute commitment to her happiness even if it costs him everything. The moon hangs invisible in the daylight sky, but she can feel its pull like gravity on her transformed soul. In a few hours, their bond will demand completion. She can accept Cade's claiming bite and become something unprecedented, or she can refuse and watch both their worlds burn. I need to know something, she says to Elena. If I complete the transformation, if I accept the claiming, what happens to me? What do I become? Elena's smile carries secrets that span centuries. You become the first of your kind, Meredith. The mother of a new species. The bridge that could unite two worlds that have been at war since the beginning of consciousness itself. The weight of destiny settles on her shoulders like a mantle she never asked to wear. Not just her happiness hangs in the balance, but the future of every supernatural being who's ever hidden in the shadows, every human who's ever wondered if magic might be real. Agent Chen's radio erupts with orders from Washington. Military authorization for lethal force. Containment protocols abandoned in favor of elimination. Time for negotiation has run out. Choose quickly, Cade tells her, his amber eyes burning with love and desperate hope. Whatever you decide, I'll accept. But choose for yourself, not for anyone else's expectations. Meredith closes her eyes and feels the pull of the moon, the song of her own wild nature, the call of a love that's stronger than the laws trying to contain it. When she opens them again, her decision shines bright as starlight. Claiming will happen tonight, consequences be damned. Some bonds are worth fighting the whole world to protect. The full moon rises blood-red through mountain smoke from the military's containment fires. Silver Creek burns at the edges where government forces have established a perimeter, the abandoned buildings serving as cover for snipers and supernatural containment specialists. The air itself thrums with electromagnetic fields designed to disrupt shapeshifter abilities, but the energy only seems to make Meredith's transformation more powerful, more complete. Agent Chen's voice cuts through the tactical chatter on her radio. All units, maintain position. Do not engage until the subjects make their move. Inside the old mining office where they've taken final refuge, Cade kneels before Meredith in his human form. Moonlight streams through broken windows, painting silver patterns across his skin. His amber eyes burn with centuries of loneliness finally touched by hope, but also with the terrible knowledge of what accepting his claiming bite will cost her. You don't have to do this, he whispers, his voice rough with emotion. Not for me. Not for anyone. Meredith touches his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, the slight tremor in his muscles as he fights every instinct that demands he claim his mate before she can be taken from him. Through their mental bond, she experiences the depth of his love, his willingness to die rather than force her into a transformation she might regret. I'm not doing it for you, she says softly. I'm doing it for us. For what we could become together. Luna and Ash stand guard at the windows, their forms shifting restlessly between human and wolf as they monitor the military positions. Their pack leader's fate hangs in the balance, and their anxiety fills the small space with electric tension. Side, Agent Chen's amplified voice carries across the compound. Miss Hayes, you have 10 minutes to exit the building voluntarily. After that, we're authorized to use any means necessary to complete our mission. Dr. Elena Voss's voice crackles through a handheld radio she's somehow acquired. Agent Chen, I'm registering massive supernatural energy fluctuations. If you interfere with this bonding process, you could trigger exactly the kind of cascade failure I warned you about. Dr. Voss, you're not in command of this operation, Agent Chen responds sharply. Washington has made its decision. Through the broken windows, Meredith can see Marcus pacing behind the government lines, his face twisted with desperate conviction that he's saving her from something terrible. Can't understand that some transformations are chosen rather than imposed, that growth often requires leaving behind everything that once felt safe. The moon reaches its zenith, and Cade's body begins to change without his conscious control. Claiming instinct is older than civilization, more powerful than individual will. His human form wavers as supernatural energy pours through him, demanding completion of the bond that will either save or destroy them both. Now, Meredith says, baring her throat to him. Before they can stop us. Cade's transformation accelerates until he becomes something between man and wolf, something that embodies the raw power of both species. His fangs extend as the claiming instinct overwhelms every other consideration. This is the moment that will define not just their future, but the future of every supernatural being who's ever hidden in the shadows. He bites her. Claiming bite is unlike anything Meredith could have imagined. It's not painful so much as overwhelming, like being struck by lightning made of pure emotion. Cade's life force pours into her through the connection, centuries of memories and experiences flooding her consciousness in waves that threaten to drown her individual identity. She sees his childhood in mountain packs that ran free under ancient stars. She experiences his first transformation, the joy and terror of discovering his dual nature. She feels his heartbreak as humans discovered his people and began the hunting that drove them into hiding. She lives through decades of loneliness as he searched for a mate who might not exist. But as his memories flow into her, her own experiences flow back into him. He feels her human pain, the betrayal that drove her into the mountains, the slow healing that came from learning to trust again. He experiences her wonder at discovering his true nature, her growing love for the pack, her choice to embrace transformation rather than cling to limitations. Their consciousness merge until the boundaries between self and other dissolve entirely. They become something new, something unprecedented, a shared being that encompasses both human and wolf without losing the essential nature of either. Transformation should stop there. Claiming bite should complete their bond and leave them as mated shapeshifters, powerful but still bound by the laws that govern their kind. Instead, something goes catastrophically wrong. Meredith's human physiology can't fully process the supernatural energies flooding through her system. Her heart stops, overwhelmed by forces her mortal frame was never designed to contain. She begins dying in Cade's arms, her life force flickering like a candle in a hurricane. But their bond won't let her go. As her human heart fails, something else takes over. The love that brought them together, the choice that defied every rational consideration, the recognition that transcends species and spans lifetimes, becomes a force more powerful than biology, stronger than death itself. Energy explodes from their joined forms, washing over the abandoned mining town in waves that make the electromagnetic containment fields look like toys. Every piece of electronic equipment within miles shorts out simultaneously. Car engines die. Radio communications cease. The military's technological advantages vanish in an instant. Agent Chen's voice cuts through the sudden silence, no longer amplified but carrying clearly in the mountain air. What the hell is happening? Dr. Elena Voss's answer comes from much closer than anyone expected. She stands in the doorway of the mining office, her eyes reflecting moonlight with an inhuman gleam that suggests she's far more than a simple government consultant. Evolution, she says simply. The birth of something the world has never seen before. Meredith's body continues failing even as supernatural energy courses through her dying cells. Her consciousness flickers between life and death, between human and something utterly beyond mortal comprehension. Through their bond, she feels Cade's anguish, his desperate attempts to share his life force with her failing form. "I'm losing her," he whispers, cradling her against his chest as her breathing becomes increasingly shallow. "No," Elena says with absolute certainty. "You're both becoming something else entirely. Something that was prophesied long before either of you were born." The energy building around them intensifies until the very air begins to glow. Luna and Ash back away from the otherworldly light pouring from their alpha and his mate, their instincts recognizing forces beyond their understanding. Side, the military forces scramble to re-establish communications and containment, but their equipment remains dead. They're witnessing something that can't be controlled by technology or contained by human authority. Marcus pushes through the confused soldiers, his face pale with terror as he realizes the woman he once loved is disappearing forever into something he can't recognize or reclaim. "Meredith," he shouts toward the glowing building. "Don't do this. Don't leave everything human behind." But his words can't reach her now. She's moving beyond the boundaries that once defined possible and impossible, beyond the limitations that once kept her small and safe and utterly miserable. Transformation reaches its crisis point. Either love will prove stronger than death, or both Meredith and Cade will be destroyed by forces too powerful for mortal beings to contain. In the space between heartbeats, between life and death, between human and something infinitely more, their fate hangs suspended under the light of a moon that has witnessed the birth and death of species, the rise and fall of civilizations, the eternal dance between love and loss that defines the very essence of existence itself. Love proves stronger than death. As Meredith's heart stops beating, the love between her and Cade transcends the boundaries of mortality itself. Their joined souls become something unprecedented, a fusion that rewrites the fundamental laws governing shapeshifter bonds. Instead of dying, they transform into beings of pure energy and intention, creatures of legend given flesh and blood. Meredith's body reshapes itself not into wolf or human, but into something that bridges both worlds perfectly. She becomes neither fully one nor the other, but a living synthesis that encompasses the best of both species. Her heart begins beating again, stronger than before, pumping blood that carries the essence of two worlds through her veins. The energy explosion that had threatened to tear them apart instead becomes the catalyst for their rebirth. When the light finally fades, Meredith stands whole and healthy beside Cade, but fundamentally changed. She can shift between forms at will, speak to both humans and shifters in their native tongues, and serve as a translator between worlds that have been divided since time immemorial. Agent Chen stares at them through the broken windows, her professional composure shattered by witnessing something that defies every protocol in her handbook. "This changes everything," she whispers. Dr. Elena Voss steps forward, her true nature finally revealed as something far older and more powerful than a government consultant. "The ancient prophecies spoke of this," she says, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "A bridge between worlds, born from love that refuses to be contained by law or logic." The military forces surrounding them lower their weapons, not in surrender but in recognition that they're witnessing something beyond their comprehension or control. Some transformations are too fundamental to be stopped by force. Marcus watches from the perimeter, finally understanding that the woman he once knew is gone forever. In her place stands someone magnificent and terrible, someone who has chosen a destiny far grander than suburban safety and predictable routines. "I release you," he says quietly, his words carrying across the mountain air. "Be happy, Meredith. Be whatever you're meant to be." The acknowledgement breaks the last chains binding her to her former life. Meredith looks at Cade, at Luna and Ash, at the family she's created through choice rather than blood, and feels complete for the first time in her existence. Together, they walk toward the forest where their pack waits. Behind them, the human world scrambles to understand what they've witnessed. Ahead lies a future where the supernatural and mundane finally learn to coexist, guided by the love of two beings who refuse to be separated by the boundaries that once divided their worlds. Sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the deepest wounds. Meredith's story started with betrayal at an altar, a moment when everything she believed about love crumbled into ash and bitter disappointment. She fled to the mountains seeking solitude, expecting to heal in isolation from a world that had proven itself capable of such casual cruelty. Instead, she found wolves at her door. Not ordinary wolves, but beings who existed between worlds, who understood that love is not about possession or control, but about acceptance and choice. They showed her that trust can be rebuilt, that family can be chosen rather than imposed, that the heart's capacity for devotion grows stronger when it's given freely rather than demanded. The woman who once planned Marcus's wedding, who worried about matching china patterns and career advancement, discovered she was meant for something far more extraordinary. She was destined to become a bridge between species, a living proof that connection transcends the boundaries humans use to define possible and impossible. Love, real love, doesn't ask you to become smaller to be acceptable. It doesn't demand that you abandon your nature to fit someone else's expectations. True love recognizes the wild thing sleeping in your soul and calls it home,